The Pamirs, 1942. A Soviet biplane takes off from Dushanbe, Tajikistan, heading to the city of Korog. 7 people on board, including 1 woman and 2 kids. But they never reach their destination. The plane crashes at 4,800 feet. Amazingly, they all survived. However, what comes next is honestly the most terrifying survival story I've ever come across. Stranded in the mountain, no food, no water, no warm clothes. Temperature plunging to minus 22 Fahrenheit and no rescue team in sight. What would you do in a situation like that? So today I'm gonna tell you a story of Anna Gureeva, the only woman on that flight. Why Anna? Well, because what she endured wasn't just a survival. It was a battle through hell on Earth. It all started in February 1942. This wasn't just any flight, it was a secret mission for the NKVD, the Soviet secret police. On board the biplane, pilot Vasily Kniznichenko, head of the Pamir border unit Major Andrei Maslovsky, Captain Mikhail Vikhorov and Alexander Zhukovsky, an NKVD officer from Tajikistan. Also on board, Anna Gureeva, the wife of Korog airport chief, traveling with her 2 children, 10-year-old Sasha and 6-month-old Valerie. This flight was her only way to reunite with her husband in Korog. No other planes could cross the unforgiving Pamir Mountains. Her 3rd son, Vladimir, stayed behind with his father, Ivan. They were flying in an R-5 biplane built in the late 30s. It was considered reliable, small, nimble, and perfect for threading between towering mountain peaks. But this wasn't any ordinary flight. Over the Pamir lies one of the most dangerous air routes in the world. Jagged peaks, unpredictable winds, and sudden weather changes make it a pilot's nightmare. In an emergency, there's no room for maneuvers, no chance for an emergency landing. Most planes avoid these mountain ranges entirely, but not this one. Its mission was the exact opposite, to carry its passengers deep in the heart of the Pamirs. How often did these planes crash? Let's take a look at the R5's test records. Here's what we know. The aircraft is simple to pilot. It's stable and when throttled down, gradually loses speed. A spin is only possible at 70 km per hour and requires an intentional input to get there. It climbs to 5,000 meters in 30 minutes and at 600 meters it reaches a maximum speed of 145 km per hour. Sounds like a reliable choice, right? Planes like R5 were even used by Soviets in Arctic, but here's the catch. While the R5 could technically fly over the mountains, pilots didn't actually do that. Instead, they used what were called a mountain gates, flying through narrow passes between 2 peaks. And then it happened. February 16th, 1942, around 3 p.m. The biplane carrying the NKVD agents was passing through the Russian gates, a narrow mountain pass. Visibility that day, terrible. The gates were completely shrouded in clouds, so the pilot made a critical decision to veer right toward lower peaks and climb to a higher altitude. He pushed the plane up to 450 meters, but then disaster struck. The wing clipped a rocky outcrop. The pilot fought to regain control, but before he could react, the unthinkable happened. The engine failed. With no power, the plane plunged into a snow-covered slope just below the summit of a mountain. Amazingly, everyone survived. No broken bones, no life-threatening injuries, just a few minor bruises for the pilot and passengers. The plane was completely destroyed except for the fuselage, which somehow stayed intact. But what saved them from a certain death? A soft snowdrift and the shelter of the towering mountain nearby. Now though, 7 people are trapped in a deadly mountain prison. And they have to figure out how to escape on their own. With the 6-month-old baby in tow, it seemed impossible. But they decided to take their destiny into their own hands and search for salvation. How did it all end? Well, I get to that soon. And trust me, it's not what you're expecting. But first, let's go back to their very first day in the mountain. Their first step: assess the food supplies. According to Major Maslovsky's diary, which he began writing in the aircraft logbook on the day of the crash, here's what they had for 7 people. Butter, 600 grams, sausage, 1 kilogram, cheese, 1.2 kilograms, 1 can of crab meat, 3 bottles of vodka, and no drinking water. They didn't count on a quick rescue or saving themselves anytime soon, so they made a tough decision that same day that they would eat only once a day, rotationing a few grams per person. It wasn't much, but they hoped it would last long enough for someone to find them. You're probably thinking, at least they had plenty of water, right? After all, they were surrounded by tons of snow and ice, and surely enough, they decided to melt ice for drinking water, but mountain snow and ice are essentially distilled water, devoid of salts and minerals. Drinking it for too long can actually flush essential salts of your body, leading to serious health problems. They also had a map with them. After studying for a few hours, pilot Kniznichenko and Captain Vikharov decided to search for the Panch River, which according to the map wasn't far from their crash site. But they found nothing. All around them were sheer cliffs and deep snow, the very snow that had saved their lives in the crash. Moving through it was almost impossible, it reached up to their chest. Exhausted, the men had no choice but to turn back. And that's when they noticed something terrifying. The plane was teething on the edge of a massive drop. It had crash landed on the very brink of the ice glacier, which sloped into a deadly abyss below. Once again, they've been incredibly lucky. Just a few meters stood between them and a certain death. Realizing how risky it was to move forward, they decided to stay put. Surely someone from Korok would start looking for them, wouldn't they? The only warm place for all 7 survivors was the cramped passenger cabin, the only part of the plane still intact. The problem? It was designed for just 4 people. There was no room to stretch it out, and they had to sit practically on top of each other. For the adults, it was a torture. Some tried escaping to the fuselage, hoping for relief, but it was freezing out there with icy winds cutting through the wreckage. It didn't take long before they retreated back to the overcrowded cabin. But the worst began at the night when temperatures dropped to minus 30 Celsius, minus 22 degrees Fahrenheit. Still, they clung to the hope that this nightmare will last only one night. They barely slept, listening intently, but all around them was deadly silence. The next day, no rescue came, and the day after that, still nothing. The weather turned worse, trapping them inside their fragile shelter. By the 3rd day, they realized that their food was almost gone. It was time to act. On February 19th, after a meager breakfast, the men set out once again to find the way down the mountain. They trudged through 6 kilometers of deep snow, sinking into it with every step. At an altitude of 12,800 feet, the lack of oxygen made every step feel like a grueling ordeal. The exhaustion set in quickly, and despite their relentless efforts, they found nothing. No path, no clue on how to escape. Defeated, they returned to the wreckage. February 20th, 3 men, Kniznichenko, Zhukovsky and Vikharov, leave the camp once again, determined to find a path to the river. But this time, this mission takes a dangerous turn. As they traverse the snowy terrain, disaster strikes. Zhukovsky loses his footing and an avalanche sends him tumbling down the slope, plummeting dozens of meters. Miraculously, the snow saved him from a certain death. He injured his knee, but it's minor enough for him to climb back up on his own and return to the wreckage. Another brush with death and still no way out. By February 20th, the group's situation had gone from bad to worse. Their food supplies were nearly gone, forcing them to start skipping meals just to make it last. To distract themselves from the growing hunger and despair, they passed the time playing dominoes. But as night fell, they faced yet another brutal, sleepless order in the freezing cold. The next day, the men make another attempt to reach the river. This time, they managed a mere 150 meters before exhaustion forced them to turn back to the wreckage. Meanwhile, Anna Gureeva prepared what was called a dinner. She heated up a water. Their strength is fading rapidly, but even warm water feels like a small victory. By the following day, even that luxury is gone. A raging blizzard traps them inside of the wreckage, forcing them to repeatedly dig out the cabin entrance to avoid being buried alive. With the storm showing no mercy, they are left with nothing to eat and nothing to drink but snow. In the aircraft logbook they write, "We ate a small piece of snow each. That was enough for today." February 22nd, and full week after the crash, they finally have a reason to hope. For the first time, it seems like help might be closer than they thought. They hear gunfire. 2 shots burst. It's coming from a nearby outpost, fired in celebration of the anniversary of the Workers' and Peasants' Red Army. The sound is unmistakable and it's close, but the question remains, how do they reach it? That day, the aircraft logbook captures their shared frustration. It's painfully clear we're close to home, just 12 to 13 kilometers at most. Yet, here we are, facing a senseless death. We can't help but think, are they searching poorly for us, or not searching at all? How could they not be found just 13 kilometers from Korok? And why wasn't anyone looking for them? These questions haunted them. That same day, they ate the last of their food. 150 grams of cheese and 20 grams of butter. And that was it. No more supplies. Now they were starving, weak, and there was no way to find more food. Only snow and cliffs surrounded them. It became painfully clear. Staying put meant only one thing: death. On the night of February 24th, the first tragedy hit. Anna Gureeva's youngest son, Valery, passed away. His little body just couldn't take it anymore. Heartbroken, they placed his body in the fuselage and made the final decision. They couldn't stay any longer. They had to make one last attempt to reach safety. It was now or never, survive or die. There was no other option. And on February 24th, they left the shelter, but it was only men who did it. That's right, you heard it correctly. Only Anna and her 10-year-old son are left behind. Completely alone, no food, no water, exhausted. You might be asking, how could they do that? Leave a woman and a child to die? The truth is, they probably decided that the harsh mountain trek was too much for Anna and her son to handle. They left them behind hoping to find help and come back for them. In Maslovsky's diary, there's an entry about this moment. At a brief meeting, we decided that with our strength almost gone, no food, no water, no cigarettes, and no matches, and the weather too poor for any planes to fly, there's no hope of waiting for rescue on the 10th or 11th day. When you feel like you've got 2-3 days left to live, there's no other choice. Those who were able to decide to make one last attempt on the 24th to find a way to the Pamir River or die. From this day on, life for Anna and her son was nothing short of a nightmare. If I had to sum it up in one word, it's just hell. And day 10 after the crash, it was actually just a start. At that moment, she seemed to realize that she's completely on her own. One thought consumed her: survive until the rescue. She took Maslovsky's logbook and turned it into her own diary. Every day she wrote about what they were going through. She wrote letters to her loved ones, especially her husband. The diary became her lifeline, keeping her going when she had nothing else left. It also became the key record of everything that happened. Later, it was included in the investigation into the crash and locked away in a classified NKVD archive. What was in that diary? Chilling details that are not for faint-hearted. I'll be referencing it through this story, so you know one thing: I'm not making any of this up. Now with the archives declassified, those pages are available for public. And so, Anna and her son were left completely alone. After seeing the men off, Anna immediately set to work. Her first priority was insulating the plane and taking stock of their supplies. In her diary she wrote, "After seeing the men off, Sasha and I started insulating the cabin. We have 3 matches left. We melted some snow for water and prepare for yet another agonizing night." The fight for survival was far from over. 3 matches for an unknown number of nights. In February, the harshest month of winter in that region, at an altitude of 4,800 feet, where altitude sickness is almost guaranteed. The thin air makes it hard to breathe, blood can seep from your nose and ears. Your heart races, dehydration sets in. Add to that the extreme shift between day and night temperatures, brutal -22 degrees Fahrenheit freezes, and relentless snowstorms. This nightmare wasn't temporary, it was her new reality. And so, 3 days passed, the matches were gone. That meant they couldn't even heat water for dinner anymore. Anna wrote in her diary, "At dawn, we woke up and spent the entire day waiting for a rescue team. Any little sound, we thought someone was coming for us. We didn't even heat water, we just kept waiting. We had nothing in our mouths at all." On the 3rd day of waiting, the weather turned worse. The plane was completely buried in snow. Anna climbed out of the cabin and with her bare hands began digging it out, desperate to avoid being buried alive in this mountain. Her hands were red, frozen, and numb from the cold, and that's when it hit her. The men were almost certainly dead. 3 days without shelter, there was no way they could survive. Her only hope was that her husband was still searching for them. But as she took in the harsh reality of her situation, she realized one thing: if she didn't act, they wouldn't survive either. What happened next was truly horrifying. Anna made an entry in her diary. February 28th, we spent the entire day waiting for a rescue team again. We're out of matches, so we collect snow in a can and leave it by the window in the cabin to melt. The days are cold, windy, even snowing. We didn't leave the cabin at all. We're so hungry. Then we started thinking about what we could eat, and we came up with the idea to cut a small piece from Valery. It was so hard to do, but we couldn't eat it. How can you eat your own son and brother? But we were starving, and so from this day on, we started cutting small pieces and eating them. This unimaginable act marked the beginning of a nightmare. that no one should ever endure. A living nightmare for any human being. But you know what? That's not even the worst part of the story. The most horrifying moment is still to come. But for now though, Anna managed to solve a temporary problem of a hunger, buying herself and young Sasha a couple more weeks of life. Now their only hope lies in a rescue plane. They've given up on the men who left them behind. Each day they eat a small piece of meat. In her diary, Anna writes that they considered ending it all, strangling themselves. But fear held them back. Diary entry: March 11th. We got up this morning but didn't leave the cabin. It was a little foggy, but the weather was good enough for flying. We scooped some snow from the broken window, put it into a few cups and melted it. We ended up with 2.5 liters of water, ate a small piece of meat and drank. The weather was beautiful, but for some reason we stopped expecting a plane or a rescue team. After eating, we sat and talked about how we might get to Korog. We thought about it a lot, but couldn't come up with anything. We're just so weak and helpless. 3 days later, they started rotationing the meat even more carefully. The weather was improving, spring had arrived, but still, no rescue plane. On March 16th, Anna wrote in her diary, Valerie is almost gone. There's only enough left for a few more meals. Just some brain matter and 4 small chunks of fat with meat. After that, we don't know how we'll survive. We'll probably have to die because there's no hope of rescue anymore. It's been a whole month and there's been nothing. No signs of help from anywhere. For half a month, they had consumed the whole body, as noted in Anna's diary. By March 20th, more than 1 month in mountains, hunger was once again gnawing at them. Melted snow no longer went down easily, and little Sasha grew weaker each day, deliriously begging for sweet tea. Anna did everything she could to distract him. She played dominoes, encouraged him to draw, and tried to keep his mind off the hunger. Sasha also loved writing letters. And one of those letters is, without question, the most haunting thing I have ever read. March 18th, 1942. Hello Papa and Vova. Sending you warm greetings. Mom and I have been starving for a whole month now, and we ate Valerie. Papa, why couldn't you take a plane and come search for us? Hello Kolya, Vitya, and Aunt Varia. Sending warm greetings and wishing you all the best. Grandpa, pray to God that someone rescues us from this cave. Hello Grandpa Pasha, Lenya, Nura, and Shura. Sending you warm greetings and wishing you all the best. There's nothing else to write. Goodbye. Anna also wrote letters. In one of them addressed to her husband, she couldn't understand why he wasn't looking for them. This detail baffles everyone who hears this story. A man loses wife, 2 children, and still doesn't search for them? In her letters, Anna also left a precise instruction of what should happen after their death. The tone was stark and unemotional, the words of someone who had nearly accepted her fate. My advice to you, dear Vanya. First, give Vovachka to my mother and Vera. Let them raise him, but only under your supervision. Make sure to send him food and supplies regularly. I don't want him living with a stepmother. This is very important for me, and I ask you to honor it. Second, I have money with me, 2,150 rubles. 1,950 are sewed into my jacket. The remaining 200 rubles are in my handbag. Vanya, the 200 belongs to my mom. She sold 2 of her scarves, so I could buy 3 silk ones. Red, green, and white for the girls. Please, I beg you, buy them and send them to her. On March 21st, Anna and Sasha ate the last of what was left of Valerie. Anna noticed that Sasha was eating very little and feeling worse by the hour. In a desperate attempt to help him, she pierced a vein in her arm with a needle, collected half a glass of blood, and gave it to him to drink. Sasha calmed down a bit and even managed to fall asleep, but just a few hours later he woke up feeling even worse. He was delirious, calling out for his father, and his fevered state lasted for days. At one point, Sasha said something to his mother that broke her completely. He told her he would never see his father and little brother again. He thanked her for everything she had done for him and made one final request. If she survived this hell, he asked her to bake pies and share them with the family in his memory. On March 22nd, Sasha passes away. By then, Anna was also starving to death. By this time, she made a decision. She would not touch her older son's body. So she carried him into the fuselage and made an entry into her diary. The storm rages on. The plane is almost entirely buried in snow, and I'm left alone like a wild animal in its den. There's no one to talk to, Night falls and I lie down alone. I'm scared. I wanted to strangle myself, but my hands wouldn't do it. I'm too afraid. I'll endure until the end. I'm so thirsty, and now I lie down to face another cold, agonizing night. For days, spring seemed to turn back into winter as a snowstorm rages outside. Anna could hear the cries and footsteps of animals nearby, but didn't dare to leave the plane. She stayed inside listening. For 2 days, the only thing she consumed was snow. On March 28th, desperation drove her to the fuselage. She cut off her son's arm, sliced it into pieces, and laid them out in the sun. At night, she continued to hear howls and strange noises outside the plane. By morning, she would find large cat tracks in the snow. It seems she was being stalked by a snow leopard. Thankfully, the animal left at dawn, allowing Anna to step outside. She would lie on the wing of the plane and doze off, exhausted and hopeless. Another horrifying month passes like this. By the end of April, there was almost nothing left of her eldest son's body. And still, no signs of rescuers. In her diary, Anna noted that 70 days had passed since she started waiting for help. She made a chilling decision. If no one came by May 15th, she would take the next step. Cut off 2 of her own fingers and eat them. She had come to believe that the pilot and the 3 NKVD agents who set out for help were dead. If they had survived, surely a rescue team would have already found them by now. To her, there was no other explanation for the lack of help. But here's the shocking part. They were not dead. After days of struggling through deep snow, Maslovsky, Viktorov and Kniznichenko finally reached an outpost. They were found by locals and taken to Korok, but Zhukovsky wasn't with them. The survivors were in terrible shape. Both NKVD agents suffered severe frostbite and had to have their legs amputated. The pilot, Kniznichenko, was luckier. His fur boots, part of the pilot's uniform, had saved his feet. And then what? Did they immediately organize a rescue mission for Anna and her son left behind in the mountains? No. After reaching safety, none of the 3 men even mentioned Anna and her son. Local villagers later said that if they had known about them right away, they would have organized a rescue and saved them. It wasn't until they arrived in Korok that the pilot casually mentioned Anna Gureeva, and even then he confidently claimed that she was already dead. He didn't mention that when they last saw her and her son, they were still alive. Another 2 NKVD agents stayed silent. Because of this, no one searched for Zhukovsky, Anna, or her son for another 2 months. And honestly, they might not have been searched for at all if it weren't for the time and the circumstances surrounding the events. It was 1942, World War II. A new directive was issued: find all downed R5 planes, salvage their engines, and send them to the front lines. That's the only reason why on May 8th, a search team was finally sent out for Korok. But they weren't looking for Anna, they were looking for the plane. The team consisted of 16 people, including Anna's husband, Ivan. Pilot Kniznichenko provided approximate coordinates of the crash site. The first discovery they made was the body of Zhukovsky, who hadn't made it to the outpost with the 3 other men. He had fallen into a ravine. His body was found near a river surrounded by empty bullet casings. Zhukovsky had been firing his pistol, trying desperately to signal for help, but the 3 men left him behind. It's clear why. His injured leg would have slowed the group down too much. 3 days later, the search team finally reached the crash site, or so they thought. The plane wasn't there. They were about to turn back, but decided to make one last attempt. Crossing a ridge, they came upon a horrifying sight. There it was, the blackened fuselage, and sitting on top of it was Anna. She turned to the group and, breaking the silence, asked her husband, "Vanya, you've probably remarried by now, haven't you?" The eerier part? He had, just a month earlier. His first question to her was, "Where's Sasha?" Anna pointed silently to a school lying nearby. After 85 days of survival in the mountain without food, Anna Gureeva had become a living corpse. But she survived. She was rescued. After everything she endured, Anna spent over 1 year in psychiatric hospital. But life went on. She remarried, had more children, and lived to old age, passing away in the early 1990s in Dushanbe. To her final days, Anna refused to talk about these 3 months in the mountains. Everything we know comes from her diary, a haunting record of survival against impossible odds. So, what happened to the NKVD agents and the pilot who left a woman and her son to die in the mountains? Well, a criminal case was opened against them for abandoning Anna and her son in a life-threatening situation. Pilot Kniznichenko was sent to a panel battalion in the front lines, where he soon died. The 2 NKVD agents were also convinced and punished. As for Anna's husband, Ivan, and her youngest son, their fates remain unknown. And the plane, it was eventually recovered from the mountain. In 1985, it was restored and now stands in the Aviation Museum in Monino near Moscow. Few people know the story of that plane or the fate of its passengers. As I mentioned earlier, this case was locked away in NKVD archives for decades, and the story was never widely known in the USSR. But today, it stands as one of the most haunting survival stories I've ever come across.